let's move into the fat consumption and kind of the things that people, again, from a high level, like kind of how do you balance those against the carbohydrates, depending on these different goals. And then we can kind of dig maybe into, hey, how might this be nuanced based on your particular situation, like the circumstances I just said? Dude that's been keto for a long time, that's, he's not over fat, but his fat mass was certainly going up and his hormones were being impacted, likely because he was under eating, number one. Primarily was under eating.
Are you talking about the keto guy or are you talking about the carnivore guy?
It's the same guy. I said keto, but I mean carnivore.
Okay. They're kind of cousins, yeah.
Yeah. I meant carnivore. And where you may be coming into this, as well as like standing next to somebody who is over fat and is carrying around a tremendous amount of body fat, way more than they should be, and how eating more fat and less carbs can be problematic in terms of your goals for potential weight loss.
Mm-hmm. So where do we start as far as like
just fats in general? No, I think just fats in general, and like where we put those in and how those get calculated against the carbohydrate and the protein.
Yeah. So that, I mean, if we're going by kind of the step-by-step formula, the fats is going to be the second component of that. And like I mentioned earlier, kind of general range, at least that I typically recommend, again, general population client, which is, the majority of the folks that we work with here, 25 to 35% fat. For most people, I would say that 25 to 30 is probably more of the sweet spot. But then, like I said, I do have individuals where their dietary habits do tend to skew a little more in favor of fat and a little less in favor of carbs. But I tend to, say at least 25% for most people for some of the reasons that you already mentioned in terms of hormone production, in terms of like cellular health. Fats play a big role.
Huge role.
Yeah. So the thing with fats also, like I mentioned as well, is we got to think about, 4 calories per gram of protein, 4 calories per gram carbs, 9 calories per gram fat. So you don't necessarily need to be consuming a large volume of fat to be getting in adequate fat intake.
Yeah, this is an interesting thing because when we start doing that, you mentioned a couple numbers there, somewhere between 25 and 35%. People are freaking out listening to this right now. They're going 35% fat. That sounds like, again, that's so much. That's a lot. It's all the other, descriptives that we hear when we, when there's a TDEE calculation going, no way, like I should be eating this much. Like people come in, they tell me all the time, these conversations I'm having, they're like, yeah, I'm eating about 1,800 calories a day. I'm like, dude, CeCe eats 500-600 more calories than that a day just for maintenance, man. Like how are you living on that? Well, it's because you've downregulated and your body's figured it out how to do it. And you're calling me because you're not reaching your goals and you're not performing the way you want to perform. So just open up your brain for a minute. Let's not be emotional about the 25 to 35% fat. So, you got somebody that's probably somewhere near, 2,300 grams or 2,300 calories a day, and you give them somewhere like a 28% fat intake. That's around 75 to maybe 80 grams of fat a day. And they look at that number and they go, oh my God, that's so much fat. And then you ask them to try to hit that whilst trying to hit their protein need. And like, dude, this is harder than I thought it was. Like I'm eating way too much fat, right? Because it's being onboarded in other areas. But they said, again, and they had it in their brain that, oh my God, 75 grams of fat a day, that's ridiculous.
Astronomical.
Yeah, it's out of line.
You made a good point as far as fat tends to piggyback on some of our protein sources. So if we're not selecting leaner sources of protein, you may be getting in a lot more fat than you realize. Again, fat has a higher caloric density. And so we're like, oh yeah, I'm hitting my protein. Oh man, my fat is just is over
off
the top.
chart.
I hit it way faster than I realized. So that's where, having the framework of the total caloric intake. And then, okay, now I have some macro, goals that I'm shooting for, some objectives that I'm shooting for. Now I go back out into the field. I actually try to execute on this. I see where I'm failing to execute. Now we can take a closer look at the food choices specifically. And that's usually my process with my clients is, let's set the calories first. Let's focus on protein first, go out into the field, start looking, see where you're landing in relation to these objectives and what obstacles are coming up. Like, oh yeah, well, I was able to, hit my protein goal, but then my fat was way off the chart. Right. Okay, maybe we need to take a closer look at some of those protein sources and maybe tweak it to more leaner sources, or how close are you paying attention to the butter, to the oils, whatever you're using, the dressings, all those kind of, like I said, sneaky calories. And then from there, we can start to, toggle the switches and turn the dials, toggle the switches.
Yeah. So again, just in conversations with folks that are a little bit more advanced, and have kind of done this for a while, again, and going back to the male female component, like again, protein first, fat second, try to get that going, in line a little bit more. And you recognize there's some challenges there. And while you're challenged with that, you're almost not paying attention to carbohydrates so much, right? It almost always falls right into line. Almost always, not all the time. You have to be regimented to some level, disciplined, and make good choices, but it almost always falls into where it needs to be. And people end up being very surprised by that. Like, I don't want to eat more carbs because I am getting this much more protein, and there's certainly enough fat in here to
be satiating,
to keep me full, keep me feeling good. And again, the things they may not realize is, like, by putting that additional fat in there, you are supporting other parts of your endocrine system and things that and as well as your joints, lubing your joints and staying on top. Of the other thing carnivore guys said, dude. Knees and shoulders, right? Knees and shoulders were really bothering him. Started to put a little bit more fat back in his diet, or adjusted that fat, got a little bit more carbs back in. He's feeling much better. So, I say all that to say, with the fat content is, let's talk about the person that is over fat, right? And knows they are, and that interplay there. Like, again, we're dialing in calories. You need to be in a deficit at some point, right? In order to lose that body fat. So let's say we are starting with somebody that was already overeating, and we're moving them into a deficit, and we're doing that through the adjustment of protein. And now we're looking at the fat to carb ratios. For somebody that is over fat, they may need or want to take in less fat, right, than they are than that 25%. There is definitely a call or spot for that. The other end of that spectrum is the person that is trying to get very lean for a very specific period of time. And when you start looking at the competitive bodybuilder as an example, there's going to be a point where that fat content becomes very low, right? The protein intake has gotten there, and they're moving into this deficit, and they are just riding a very fine line of being in that deficit without going so low that they are reversing the process, right? Where they are now losing muscle or cannot perform at all.
Yeah, they're scraping their BMR and not leaving enough margin.
And so maybe those people are taking their fat content down to less than 10% for a period of time, but that does not last very long.
Definitely
right?
not.
They come out of that not with a reverse diet. They come out of that with a recovery diet. One of the first things they start putting back in is the carbs and fats, and particularly on the fat side, to start to bring that back up. The pace at which you do that, or the tempo at which you do that, is important, so you're not putting on too much fat at one time. But the point being is they're not there for very long. Eating like that with like the very low fat diet, it can be miserable, and it can have detrimental effects on both your performance, your recovery, and then again, hormone profiles, which I don't want to get into that. People are always trying to blame their hormones for shit, when it really boils down to, you don't eat enough, you sleep like shit, you drink too much, you don't exercise, well. You're on a plan. You exercise a lot. That doesn't mean it's good, right?
Yeah, you may be under recovered. Yeah.
So people are hearing these numbers and they're going, "What in the really? Well, what about the fat guy? Like, what should he do?" Well, he might be a much lower percentage of fat coming in, because he's coming in way high as it is, and he's got plenty of that in storage, for us to utilize.
Yeah.